Welcome to Inside New York.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Hi, this is Shaka Khan, and you're watching Inside New York.
And this year's Tony Awards is the biggest night on Broadway.
And I'm on Inside New York.
What I was most concerned about in black theater is that the kinds of characters we get from so-called European theater don't exist for us.
Welcome to Inside New York. Today, Inside New York has your behind-the-scenes look and backstage pass to black theater with our featured guest, Garland Thompson, founder of the Frank Silvera's Writers Workshop. Thank you so much for joining us today on Inside New York.
Joan, it's always a pleasure to see you. And
Yes.
really appreciate this. And this is the first time that we've had an opportunity to actually be on Inside New York. So
Right.
we're delighted to be here.
Long overdue,
Yes.
but always appreciated.
Yes.
And of course, you're right on the brink of working on 2 new projects that we
Yes.
want to tell our audience about, but we also want to make sure that all of our viewers are familiar with the mission of the Frank Silvera Writers Workshops.
First of all, Joan, the major question as I travel around the country and in various venues and even on the web, the World Wide Web, which is we get information that people ask, who is or was Frank Silvera? Frank Silvera, he was originally from Kingston, Jamaica, born in 1914, and passed in an untimely accidental death in Los Angeles in his home while working on a domestic in a kitchen accident. We lost him, and it just devastated the theater and the arts community because he was our leader. He typified and he personified the excellence in the arts and in theater. He had come to Los Angeles to work in films like Viva Zapata, starring Marlon Brando, and he brought the first James Baldwin play, which is now classic, Amen Corner. Originally brought it from Los Angeles, his company, Frank Silvera Theater being. He brought that to Broadway in 1964. So we're going back a little while. So when he had his untimely passing and transition in 1970, it took us 3 years to finally decide on how to honor this man. And I came to New York during that period in 1971 with the first Pulitzer Prize play by Charles Gordon. I was production stage manager and the assistant director for that work, which was written by Charles Gordon. And we are, by the way, in the 30th anniversary of the first black Pulitzer Prize winning play by a black playwright. His name is Charles Gordon, who has since passed away too. His play, No Place to Be Somebody, opened, Joseph Papp opened it originally, and it was a major hit and went on to win the Pulitzer Prize. And when they came to Los Angeles, I was picked up by Chuck, who I was working in Los Angeles at that time, and Frank had his untimely death in that same fateful summer. So when we came to New York, it took us 3 years. Morgan Freeman, whose career has absolutely gone through the ceiling now, we decided, we were both working down at the Public Theater for Joseph Papp in that 71 period, and we said, we need to do something to develop new playwrights, and because there were almost no venues for writers of color to go and to get his or her work read aloud, critiqued, and to put it out there and get some movement. And so it took us a while. I was stage managing River Niger by Joseph Walker on Broadway at that time, and so by 1973 we decided that we would do something, and we booked the theater, which is no longer there now. It's the old, where all those Arthur Miller plays and where Off-Broadway was born in that area down around 34th and Broadway. It was called the Martinique Theater. It's no longer there now. It's gone. But it was a historical area. So at that time, we came in, Joan Sandler of the old Black Theater Alliance, bless her heart, she's still working in the arts and a real supporter, said, go see Hazel Bryant, who is in the Martinique Theater, And we made a deal with Hazel Bryant, and in 3 weeks you could not get in the place. It was packed with the Mary Alice's, who had gone on to win major awards, Emmys and Tonys for Fences on Broadway. She and I both came with the Gordon play and went to Broadway together. And so a lot of major players, Anazaki Shange, who wrote For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When Rainbow Is Enough, worked with us during that period and developed. So we saw a lot of new writers, and we've read over 5,000 writers since in our 26-year history on which we have worked as a playwright development program as opposed to a presenter. In other words, we would nurture and help develop. And then, as we have just recently done with a play called Oshun, The Goddess of Love by David D. Wright, which deals with the Yoruba the version of how the world began, we would do a reading of it on a Monday evening and a critique in the workshop, and then we would then lobby to get it to a major venue. In this case, we went to the New Rican Poets Cafe, and Rome Neal and his producer, Miguel Agarin, gave us an opportunity to present the work, and then it was totally sold out. So it's a co-venture deal. So that's one of the areas where, as you can see, I can go on and on about how the workshop was developed, and we're very excited. We just closed out at Queens College in the theater program. Dr. Joe Tanner wrote a wonderful play about the life of the great Anita Bush, whom none of your viewers will probably have a clue as to who Anita Bush was. She died in 1974. She was the first black woman to have her own theater company in New York City. It was called the Lafayette Players.
Oh, I've heard of the Lafayette Players. Sure.
And since many people think of the new Lafayette Players, which Ed Bullens, a playwright, and Bob Macbeth formed in the end of the 60s and going into the 70s, but the original Lafayette Players was the fabulous Anita Bush, who we're talking 1915 through 1940.
1915. Okay,
Here was now. Can you imagine here is a young woman of color who was both native as well as African American descent, who was working, trying to develop her own theater company in New York City at that particular time. Now think in terms of the problems that we have today in 1999 to develop a company, to pay the bills, to hire the actors, to engage the theater, to develop and write and critique and to prepare. Can you imagine what the obstacles she must have gone through? So Joe Tanner, bless her heart, Dr. Joe Tanner, who runs the Black Theater program at Queens College, wrote a piece. She's an authority on black women of the turn of the century. She wrote a book called Dusty Divas that chronicles the history of women in the arts, and the Laura Bowmans and the Anita Bushes, and there were several other people. Ada Walker, who was the wife of the famous team Williams and Walker, which was Bert Williams, and that whole period in the 20s. So this is the kind of thing that we're interested. Now we're preparing to look at. We have a crisis of which we haven't seen anything quite like this, Joan, in probably 30 to 40 years. We see where the funding is closing and drying up on the national level, where you see the National Endowment for the Arts essentially being cutting back its programs. We see foundations are moving away from supporting developmental and grassroots art, and we see where there are so few venues, places where a new and experimental work can be developed. These are the things that we are now looking to. So we have to, the American Black Theater movement essentially has to reinvent itself as we prepare for this new millennium.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an ongoing issue and concern for our viewers on Inside New York. As you know, we've had Woodie King on, and Lloyd Richards and Barbara Ann Tier, and this is always a issue that's in the forefront. What is exactly the state of African American theater, or black theater as it's popularly called, because you now, track through the years from 1915 up to now, and I want to ask you, when you started with the Frank Silvera Writers Workshop, have you seen much of a change, or are we regressing in terms of opportunities?
We clearly were warned as we came out of the 70s into the 80s that we needed to start to look to developing a different funding and a different paradigm to figure out how we were going to go, because we were warned that there would be some changes. The pendulum will swing differently in the 90s, and that we may not have the same funding base. What we thought was going to be around for a while in terms of grant and public and not-for-profit funding now is slowly but surely changing. So you'll see now in New York City with the new Federal Theater, the Woodie King, executive producer, is struggling like many of our other companies. There are almost no companies of color that, and certainly no regular repertory companies. The Negro Ensemble Company is at this point now having to reinvent itself. It no longer has a home, and no longer has a regular season. So far, we're not sure what they are planning. We know they're planning to regroup, but we have not seen what the plans are. Now, there are two areas that we know that we have to focus on. One, we need to clearly have a workable, viable space in which to present this art form. Very critical. So we've been reaching out to proposals to partner with other entities that say have the space and we have the energy.
Right. Like you mentioned the Apollo.
Yes.
That was a possibility. I don't know if it's continuing to be a possibility, but it seems like an ideal possibility because they have a huge theater, at least a theater that's large enough for developmental work. And I would assume, I don't know, they have upstairs and there's a
yes, they have
production
they have a second floor, which was primarily designed very much like the studio here for television and for special kinds of CD development. But we have used it for our special events. But along the cultural corridor of 125th Street, which traditionally, going back to the Harlem Renaissance, was considered the cultural capital of Black America and the African American community. You see now almost no, except for the Apollo on the middle of that thoroughfare. The workshop had been at St. Nicholas 125th Street for some 20 years in a loft theater. That's no longer there. We tried to arrange to make a deal with the landlord to get access to the building. It was not possible, so we were instructed to move.
Is this because of the empowerment zone and the commercial market value pressures?
Well, the empowerment zone now is attempting to try to give some possibilities of construction and some places to go. The Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone still has yet to fund any major projects along the cultural corridor. We know that there are proposals that are before the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. For instance, the Harlem Victoria 5. We were there for years, a resident company. That is now closed at this particular point. We know that there are requests for proposals out to decide. The state has taken the building back, and we're waiting to see what entity is going to put that back in the market, and hopefully there will be community access. So right now we're at a very critical crossroads in the arts. So we're now looking to see what new ways we can do this and reach out. Now we're very excited about the Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis Foundation that for the first time raised $300,000 for and presented a group of community theaters, of which the Hadley Players and New Federal Theater, were part of that structure. Given each one of these theaters a grant and not a lot of money, but it was $20,000 per, and that's helpful. What it does, it sends a signal to other funding sources that yes, we are still supporting this art form.
Well, I wish to thank you so much for joining us today
Yes.
on Inside New York.